used to offer helpful scientific corrections for my mother's facts. She'd be mid-story. She was a great storyteller. She'd be building the momentum of this narrative, and the main character was running for her life, and their mean dinosaur would jump out, and my dad would interject with the fun fact that actually T-Rex didn't live in the Jurassic period as she had stated, but in the late Cretaceous one. Whenever he did this, my mom would huff in exasperation, and she would say, "Quit being the knowledgeable guru!" And then my dad would clench up slightly because it's pronounced guru. But you can't actually say in response to "quit being the knowledgeable guru," it's pronounced guru without ending up divorced. My mom taught me that gurus are just out to impress people with how much they know. She taught me that their corrections are a way to make themselves look smart, irregardless of how it makes anyone else feel.
I grew up in a family where correcting one another was a blood sport. And the ultimate example of that was the dreaded irregardless. Whenever I hear the word irregardless, my head nearly pops off because it was drilled into me over and over that irregardless is not a word. And anyone who says irregardless is stupid. Regardless is a word. It means without regard, like to not value or give weight to someone or something. For my entire school education, elementary through university, drilled into me, irregardless is not a word. When you put the IR, the prefix ir, in front of a word, it negates it. So irregardless technically means without regard. So basically it means regard. And so I learned it because I didn't want to look foolish and I didn't want those big red marks on my papers. And trained in the blood sport of snooty grammar, I took it very seriously. Funny how that worked out, because in 2020, due to centuries of common usage, Merriam-Webster defended the use of irregardless officially in their dictionary. And their definition of irregardless? Regardless. It was used so frequently to mean regardless that now it does. Irregardless now officially means regardless. Apparently, the prefix ir is being used as an amplifier rather than a negator. Ironic how after centuries of judgmental grammarians argued that irregardless just means regard, irregardless has proven itself to be valid, and the act of judging other people's grammar has turned out to be the failure of regard.
Before I talk about correcting language, I have a question for you. What is correct English? I mean, it isn't like math, where it's pretty evident that 4 times 5 just equals 20. Grammar rules aren't like the rules of physics or even biology. They're not laws of the world. They're customs of specific tribes. You might call it original English. Not to get guru-y on you, but if you called it original English, you would be dead wrong. All of the different styles of English we speak now come from ancestors, and maybe there is some original English defined at some arbitrary point on that timeline, but it is not the language that we speak today. Proper English is not the trunk of the tree. It's just one of the branches. None of the Englishes being spoken today are original. English in India or Kenya doesn't just have a different accent. It has subtly different rules. To say nothing of people who have English as their second language, you can learn to tell from the grammar errors what someone's first language is. Chinese people will often use sentences that are grammatically correct, but with very unusual but technically proper word choices. People whose first language is Arabic will put a question word in front of a sentence, like, "Why you are correcting my language." Spanish people will do the reverse. They'll say the statement and then they'll add "no" at the end to make it a question, like, "You are correcting my English, no?" Like that. People who speak African American vernacular English, which would be their native language usually, will play with the verb to be, sometimes dropping it as in "she a pain in the neck," or adding it as in "she been lecturing me all day about grammar." So it's not just culture, too, that you can learn about. My sister, who was shamed brutally for her dyslexia as a child and who still struggles to sometimes show up in written word spaces without fear, she can recognize another dyslexic by the specific spelling errors that they make. As a child, I remember this exercise where I was struggling to read words in a mirror, and my sister walked in, and not only could she read them, she didn't even realize they were reversed. All words were that hard for her. I have some friends who are pronoun ninjas, deftly weaving through they as a singular pronoun in ways that are, by the way, technically correct, but really challenging for me when I try to do them. And when someone hears those friends and their patterns of speech, maybe someone feeling vulnerable or unsure, that listener knows that the speaker is someone who cared enough about different genders being comfortable that they put in the time to learn to use pronouns in that way. How could that type of English possibly not be right? What does make one type of English the right one? Power. It's power. The Oxford English Dictionary is right because the Oxford people were the power clan at the time, and they made it so. And that power has continued to flow along those lines. People still learn proper English today, not because it's actually different from other dialects, certainly not because it's better, but because it is the dialect that the people controlling power have used to signal to one another that they are from the same tribe. It's the language that my friend, upon moving to Canada, struggled to learn as his fourth language. Until he and I spoke in French. My French sounds like it's been through a blender, and you could see him rearranging the words in his mind to figure out what the heck I had said, and he never complained once. He did ask me to correct his English, though. Even after he was easy to understand, he kept asking, I kept correcting, he kept working, because the bar for the master's degree program he was aiming for was that high. Flawless, native-sounding English was the goal. Serviceable, understandable English counted for nothing. Oh, also his perfect French and Kirundi, his solid Swahili, and his bits of a variety of tribal languages, those all counted for nothing as well, even though much of what he was studying happened in countries where those are the main language and he could read the original texts. He needed to speak proper English. He needed to spend years of his life polishing it until it was perfect to even get a seat at the table. And that is what I mean by one group making their native tongue the key to power. When I say, your accent is so hard to understand to a bank teller from India, I am saying it to them in a North American accent that they had to learn to understand, which, by the way, the teller never complains about, because not only is understanding me her problem, not mine, my understanding her is her problem, not mine. Of course, asking someone to repeat themselves because you aren't good with accents is fine. But to correct people when you already understand them? Think about that for a second. Not only has the supremacy of your brand of English meant that they've put in all the work and you've put in none, but you're increasing that work for no good reason. You are saying, I understood you fine, but I want you to keep struggling with this language until I must put in zero effort at all. Like grammar and spelling are some kind of higher virtues. I don't know much about virtues, but I do know that any virtue with such a long list of victims is one that I want no part of.
Change can be hard. We think we're losing something when something uncomfortable and familiar feels interrupted. After decades of successful pronoun use, suddenly we're wrong, got it all mixed up, and people keep correcting us. And even worse, they're correcting us publicly. And nobody likes to be wrong, especially in public. But maybe the way we're looking at this is wrong. Maybe we've become possessive about our pronouns when we just don't need to. Maybe we're gaining something instead of losing when language expands. I have this thing that happens when I meet a couple to plan their wedding, and I ask them, is anyone changing their name, their last name, as a part of this ceremony? In Alberta, either person in the couple can take the other person's last name or a hyphenated version of both names together. So for instance, and I'm gendering this on purpose, a woman can take the man's last name, or a man can take the woman's last name, or either one can combine the two names in either order with a hyphen, or either one can keep the name they started with, any combination thereof. And I suppose technically they could even swap last names. That would be fun. When I meet with a queer couple, almost always the conversation goes like this. What are our options? And so I tell them, and they say, oh, that's fun. We'll have to think about what that we might like to do. When I meet with a straight couple, almost always, when I ask the question, the groom looks at the bride and he waits for her to answer. And then, irregardless of what the woman has replied, I look at the groom and ask, and you? Will you be changing your name? And he looks at me puzzled because that's not a thing, right? Unless they were going the hyphenated route. The grooms have rarely, if ever, even considered that they could take the bride's last name. Now, queer couples have already figured out that this is a thing. That's the rules, though not necessarily conceived that way, and they're technically equal. They go both ways. They, as a singular pronoun, has technically been a thing pretty much forever as well. We just weren't familiar with it. We're not losing any knowledge or any pronouns when we learn how to use it in that way. We're gaining a more compassionate culture, and we're receiving the precious gift of someone's trust. We can debate the value of the Oxford comma, yes, or the double space following the period, not anymore, until the semicolons come home. Or we can take a step back from the rigorous defense of grammar as we learned it in that particular moment in time and choose the relationships instead.
When someone first shared with me what it felt like to have their language corrected, I felt terrible. I love words so much. I love language. I didn't mean to be a guru. I don't think my dad meant to be a guru as I was growing up either. Because watching him as an adult, sharing fun facts at family gatherings, I think he just loves science and wants to share that love. I don't think he's trying to look smart, especially not at the expense of making someone else feel stupid. I think he genuinely believes people want to know that much about the mating habits of the South American tsetse fly. But it's about effect, not intention, isn't it? And so for a while, I muscled through not correcting people. I let the broken English stand, or what I thought was the broken English. People before grammar, I would tell myself. Except that's not at all. It's not a trade-off. English that is expanding its walls isn't broken English, that's growing English. Languages are meant to grow. And English where the accents and the variations in grammar allude to the story of the speaker is a vastly more wonderful language. I don't want my friend to learn to say, "Would you like me to make supper?" because "I make supper, yes?" is better. It's a statement just about today's supper, but it's also about all the meals preceding it. It alludes to a childhood surrounded by simmering pots of beans and rice and brilliant strands of red chilies hanging from the roof of the kitchen. My sister's misspelled words aren't a fault. They're the story of a childhood spent wrestling defiantly against the letters that wriggled and would not say still, and she fought, and she won entry into the world of the written word. And a slight scar from her dyslexia, the slight scar it has left on her written word, is a badge of honor. Pronouns that feel strange, or grammar patterns associated with poverty or specific subcultures, making all of these things welcome not only makes the conversation more inclusive, it makes it a better conversation. It laces it with all kinds of different histories and identities. And when we speak, our words carry not only their meanings, but also our stories. Why would we mistake those stories for stains and try to scrub them away? Because we do get to choose. The rules of language follow us, not the other way around. We do things differently, irregardless of what it used to be like, and the official rules, they catch up. Language is not meant to be tidy, with the rules stacked neatly against each other like petals in a tight bud. It's meant to be messy, with cracks and uncertainty and things constantly changing shape. That's not language falling apart. That's language blooming.